Begin. Good evening, everyone. For those who were not here on Tuesday, this is Introduction to Microeconomics. And we'll be covering markets for the next 7 weeks, 6.5 weeks now. Last time, really, we wanted to remind ourselves of some of the key issues, in fact, the key issue from our macro days, and that is the whole concept of demand and supply. I will send you the homework in the morning. You'll return it to me by class time on Tuesday. And we'll see if we could stick to that kind of conversation and that kind of assignment with some regularity going forward. All right. So last time we talked about demand and markets. We reviewed demand and supply, how we go about calculating demand and supply. We understand demand and supply to mean. We talked about market equilibrium. We defined very clearly what we meant by market equilibrium. We also talked about market efficiency and what that meant. Then we talked about what happens when a market is not in equilibrium, a market that's in disequilibrium. Principally, we talked about this disequilibrium being caused by the government. Right? That is, we looked at our market and we calculated the equilibrium price or the market clearing price, what we call our P star, and we calculated our quantity, our equilibrium quantity, which is our Q star. Let me make sure I get my system set up. So we were able to determine one unique market clearing price at which total demand or quantity demanded is exactly equal to quantity supplied. We said at this unique price, persons who want to buy this product, everybody who wants to buy this product and is prepared to pay this price can obtain this product. And so that gave us our equilibrium quantity demanded, the amount that customers will want to buy at that price. We also found out the amount that suppliers or firms we want to put on the shelf or supply to the market at that price. So we found a one unique price at which quantity demanded is exactly quantity supplied. Nobody's gets shared out and nothing is left on the shelf at the end of the period, and everybody's happy. A market is in equilibrium. But then we said, what happens if the government comes along and says, I have some issues. I have some poor people who cannot afford the price for this product that's currently prevailing in the marketplace. So I am going to insist that this is the price that you have to charge, right? And you cannot charge a price higher than this. Right? We call that a price ceiling, where the government imposes a price that is below the equilibrium price. We would like the equilibrium price to be at a certain level, but the government is saying, no, my people cannot afford that. You would have to. Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Okay.
I turn it on the video now so you can see my face.
Okay. Everybody, okay, this is Carla Kemp. Carla Kemp, this is everybody.
Hello.
Everybody's involved, right? So, shall I continue? Okay, so yes. Government is imposing a price ceiling. Right? Government says, I am going to set a maximum price for a product or service, and the market cannot charge a price higher than this price. Right? And we have examples of this in things like rent controls, price controls on breadbasket items, price control on medical services, etc. Right? And the idea behind such an action by the government is usually aimed at sort of helping the poor or limiting the cost of some product or services. Right? But clearly, it's an interference in the market, it's an intervention in the market, and it causes the market to move away from equilibrium. Right? The question that we wanted to ask ourselves last time is that if government were to impose this price ceiling, for example, what is that going to do to the market? And we said generally, if there's a price ceiling, that means the price is below the equilibrium price, We know according to the law of demand, if price falls, quantity demanded goes up. So if there's a reduction in the price, demand for this product is going to rise. But we also know from the law of supply that if price falls, firms are going to be less willing to provide this item to the market because they can get less for it. So we have a case when government imposes a price ceiling. More people want to buy this product because obviously it's less costly now, but less firms want to supply this product. More people want to buy it, but fewer stores want to sell it. We're going to end up with a shortage. So a price ceiling, when government intervenes in the market in the form of a price ceiling, it always, always, always results in a shortage of whatever the product or service is. Whenever there's a price ceiling, as government says, the price cannot go above this point. Regardless of what the market price is supposed to be, this is the price that government says you cannot charge more than this. On the other hand, government can intervene in the market through what is called a price floor. Government says that you cannot charge less than this. Right? A price floor is when the government mandates or set a maximum price for a product. Right? And usually government would do this if they're trying to support, say, certain industries. They were trying to support farmers. They wanted to try to support the steel industry or some other industry that they want to help grow and develop. As I said, okay, we're going to give concessions, all right, as a means of support. The idea here by actions by the government is providing support for a specific industry while it develops and matures. Right? Examples of this include minimum wage and the packing house system. The idea is that government is going to provide a guaranteed level of income. The problem, once again, is that this is government intervening into an efficient market. And that moves us away from equilibrium. Because if the market price is P star, but government says, I am not going to allow the price to fall to P star. Right? Yes, the market rate for this type of labor is X, but I don't think people can live off of X. So I'm going to insist that you cannot pay them X. You have to pay them an amount higher than X. That's a price floor. Government imposes such a thing, so clearly that causes a disequilibrium in the market. And we said last time, when you have a price floor, right? If you're talking about labor, for example, the price of labor goes up. If the price of labor
Hello?
My apologies, folks. BPL decided that they didn't want me to teach class today. So I told them I was not prepared to do that. So we're going to work off by generator. All right, hopefully no one left. Well, maybe 1 or 2 persons left. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can still hear me. All right, good. So we were talking about government intervention in the market and the fact that government intervention leads to disequilibrium in the market, and that disequilibrium is either going to be in the form of a shortage or surplus. And we talked about how we would go about calculating a shortage or surplus. Now, our next big issue, or really the first issue in micro that we're going to consider, is the question of elasticity. Elasticity is simply a measure of responsiveness or sensitivity. And we're going to start our discussion talking about what is called price elasticity of demand, usually written as the Greek letter epsilon and the lowercase d, but we most often write it as just simply the capital letter E with a lowercase d. It makes the same, it's used the same, it's just easier to write for some persons who don't have the familiarity with the Greek alphabet. All right, so what do we mean by elasticity? Some things we know. We know for sure that the law of demand says that if price goes up, when we're talking about normal goods, if price goes up, quantity demanded falls. If you raise your price, you're going to have fewer sales, fewer customers. And the reverse being true, all other things being equal, ceteris paribus. If you raise your price, you're going to lose customers, you can lose sales. If you lower your price, you're going to gain some customers, you're going to gain some sales. We know that. That's a given. We accept and understand the law of demand. Right? But now, we're trying to look at this thing from the perspective of the store owner, from the perspective of the firm. And from the firm's perspective, that's not always enough. Right? That we understand if we raise our price, we're going to lose some sales. We also know if that we have a sale, we're going to get some extra customers. Fine. But sometimes for firms, it's more important to note how sensitive or how responsive our customers will be when we do decide to change our prices. Right? We want to know if we raise our price just a slight amount, are we going to have all our customers rushing out the door? We would also like to know that we need to really have a really big sale before we have a significant amount of new customers coming in. So we want to know how sensitive customers are to a change in demand. Because ideally, we would love to be in a position where we can raise our price and lose very few customers or very few sales. Now, we know we're going to lose some because that's the law of demand. You raise your price, you're going to lose some sales or some customers. But it would be really good for us as a store owner to be able to continue to raise our price, but yet see our sales only fall off modestly or something of that nature. And that's talking about how sensitive or responsive consumers are to price changes, right? And the price elasticity demand measures that sensitivity. So how does it go about doing that? The price elasticity demand, E of D, measures the percentage change in quantity demanded resulting from a given percentage change in the price. So these are all about percentages now. This is no absolute anymore. We're talking about percentage changes. We're saying when we raise our price by 5%, how much does our sales change in percentage terms? So we're all talking about percentage. And one of these mathematical quirks, if you have two percentages, one in the numerator and one in the denominator, like how we have here, and you divide them by each other, your answer is not a percent. Your answer is just simply a value. Right? A percent divided by a percent does not give you a percent. Just one of those mathematical things. It's a long drawn explanation for why. I don't want to go into it, and you don't need to know it. It's enough to know that a percent divided by a percent just gives you a value. So whatever your answer is when you begin calculating elasticity, you do not put the percent sign afterwards, because it's not a percent, it's a value that you're calculating. All right, so something's going wrong. All right. The first thing we want to talk about was called elastic demand. Right? So elastic demand is said to be elastic if consumers are very responsive or very sensitive to any little change you do to your prices. Right? In fact, elastic demand very technically says that demand is said to be elastic if a 1% change in the price level leads to a change in quantity demanded of more than 1%. You raise your price by 1%, you lose more than 1% in sales. You raise your price by 5%, you lose more than 5% in sales. You raise your prices by 15%, you lose more than 15% in sales. Right? So elastic demand says consumers are very responsive or sensitive to change in the price level. It's also true then that if that's the case, if you lower your price, let's say you decide I'm going to have a sale, and I'm going to have a sale 20% off. You lower your price by 20%, but you find that your sales jump up much more than 20%, because people are very sensitive to a change in your prices. Right? I can cite, well, before the whole COVID thing, a great example is John Bull on Bay Street. John Bull very rarely has a sale. It has a sale once a year. Right? And if you ever work downtown, and know people who work downtown, especially at the female persuasion, whenever John Bull has a sale, everybody's in John Bull. Right? John Bull could have a 5% off sale. And because they so rarely have sales, or because they're such a high-end store, they find that their sales, their actual sales on actual customers, jumps up considerably more than 5%. Right? Because the demand for that product is elastic. Consumers are very responsive or very sensitive to changes in the price level when we're talking about a product whose demand is elastic. Then you have products whose demand is inelastic. Demand is said to be inelastic if consumers are very unresponsive or insensitive to changes in the price level. Right? This means that if you were to raise your price by 1%, you find that your sales fall off by less than 1%. You raise your price by 5%, your sales fall off by less than 5%. You raise your price by 20%, your sales fall off by less than 20%. Right? Supposedly, and I can't swear if it's true or not, but I want to believe it's true. This is the case with KFC, where they know that they can raise their price, but y'all Bahamians, y'all love KFC so much that the fall off in sales is going to be nowhere near the same as the increase in the price. There's going to be some fall off in sales, sure, because the law of demand says that's going to happen. There's going to be some people who say, listen, I don't get what y'all say about KFC, that's just, $10 for 2 pieces of chicken is too much. Right? Suck their teeth, turn around and leave. Right? But you're going to find most people, and KFC is counting on this, if I could just get you on the line, all right, you can get your chicken. Inelastic demand. We also see inelastic demand in terms of necessary goods or necessities, right? Where you can consume pretty much the same amount of electricity, the same amount of water pretty much every month God sent, right? Regardless of if BC raised the price of electricity, suck your teeth, make noise, row, but still consume the same amount of electricity. Inelastic demand. And finally, we have unit elastic demand. Demand is said to be unit elastic or unitary elastic if a 1% change in the price level leads to a change in quantity demanded of exactly 1%. You raise your price by 5%, you lose 5% in sales. You drop your price by 5%, you gain 5% in sales. Right? Unit elastic, one-to-one relationship. You raise your price, your sales fall off by exactly the same percentage. You lower your price, your sales go up by exactly the same percentage. So those are the three types of demand that we're going to look at, a broad category: elastic demand, inelastic demand, and unit elastic demand. Now, we have all become very familiar with the demand curve from our macro days. Right? Demand curve is downward sloping because at higher price, people want to buy less goods. At lower price, people want to buy more goods. The result is you have a demand curve that's downward sloping. The law of demand insists that makes it that way. Now, if we were to apply our understanding of elasticity to a demand curve, we'll find that the upper end of the demand curve, that is the part associated with the highest price levels, demand is going to be elastic. Because what we found is that for normal goods, the higher the price of a normal goods, we're not talking necessities, and we're not talking luxury goods. So normal goods. The higher the price of a normal good, the more sensitive we are to a change in the price level. Because it is an expensive product, it's taking a lot more out of our pocketbook than a cheap product. Similarly, the lower part of the demand curve is inelastic. So as the price comes down, our sensitivity to a change in the price becomes less and less. We're less sensitive, less responsive. Right? If we have an item that we're only paying, I don't know, do people still put scrunchies in their hair? Scrunchies cost what? $1, $2, unless you really go fancy. Right? A 50% increase in a scrunchie from $2 to $3. That ain't gonna make a bit of difference to your willingness to buy that product. However, imagine a 50% increase in a refrigerator, because yours just went out. It's a big difference. It's a much more of a sensitive and responsive issue for you. You can think twice, 3 times, 10 times before you buy a refrigerator that costs you 50% more than it would have cost you a week ago. So when we're talking about the demand curve, at a higher point of the demand curve, the upper part of the demand curve is elastic. At the midpoint, unit elastic, and at the lower part is inelastic. And lastly, there are two special cases that we want to just touch on very, very briefly. Two special cases of price elasticity of demand. The first is a perfectly elastic demand. Demand is said to be perfectly elastic if a 1% change in the price level leads to an infinite change in quantity demanded. You raise your price by even the smallest amount. You don't just lose some customers, you lose every last single one. Your business goes from plenty to zero. We see this kind of situation most often when you have, if you think about agricultural products. Let's say you are a farmer in the Midwest of the United States and you're growing soybean. You're growing soybean, your neighbor's growing soybean, the guy down the road is growing soybean, the guy in the other county, all of y'all are growing soybeans. The exact same variety. You have a granary, you know, a cereal maker, the one who buys your product. Right? And at a given price, you can sell all your products as long as you're willing to settle at this negotiated price. At the same time, the granary is able to buy as much soybean as it wants at that price. So what happens if you decide to raise your soybean price by even $1? As far as the granary is concerned, I can get all the soybean I want at the old price. Why should I pay your new price? Even if your new price is only slightly higher, why should I pay slightly more when I can get all I want at the old price? So when you raise your price, demand falls to zero. Then again, as a farmer, why would you raise your price? If you can already sell everything that you're growing, you can already sell your entire crop at the old price. What is your incentive for raising your price? The result is we end up with a demand curve that's perfectly flat because you have an elasticity demand that's infinite. There is no incentive for farmers to raise their price, and there is no possibility of the purchaser willing to pay more than the market price. You raise your price, you lose all your business. The merchant says, you know what, I don't need to deal with you. I can go somewhere else. I get all I want from somewhere else. So that's the case where E of D is infinite. Okay, I need to make that change, folks. So it's not greater than infinity, that's equal to infinity. Now, back to where we were. Then you have what is called perfectly inelastic demand. So demand is said to be perfectly inelastic if, in fact, there is no relationship between price and quantity. If quantity demanded does not change regardless of the percentage change in price. It don't matter what you do with your price, the demand for your product is going to be what it is. Now, this is quite an odd situation, and there are relatively few examples of such a situation where you have perfectly inelastic demand. One example may be, let's say, who's the guy now who's shooting off rockets into space? Elon Musk, right? So his heavy lift rocket requires 2 external tanks, much more efficient than the old NASA, whatever space plane they had, but they still require 2 booster rockets, but only 2 booster rockets, right? So if you're the manufacturer of booster rockets, right, lowering your price is not going to encourage Elon Musk to buy more than 2 because he only needs 2. Right? So, and therefore, lowering your price is not going to make a difference. Raising your price may make him mad, but he still has to have his 2. So really, there is no connection between change in price and change in quantity demanded. And in situations like that, you also see this quite a lot in what is called military contracts, where the contract of the firm that has won the contract, so they're no longer competing with any other firm anymore. Once they've won the contract, let's say you are the US Air Force, and you have somebody like, I don't know, Northrop Grumman, right? They produce military planes, among other things, and they won the contract to build the newest, most fastest, most lethal, most whatever it is, US plane for killing people. Now that they've won the contract, they no longer need to sort of I need to reduce the cost associated by plane to reduce the price because I'm competing with other people producing the same plane. Nobody else is producing the same plane because you have the contract. So then there's no relationship between any price changes and the amount that the military is ordering. The military is saying, I want 1,000 of these planes. Full stop, end of story. I don't want 1,001, I don't want 999. So you now separate price and quantity, that relationship, you break that relationship. In such situations, what often happens is the contracts are no longer written in terms of price and quantity, they're written in terms of, say, cost plus. So Northrop Grumman would agree with the US military, the US Air Force in this case, that what you would pay us would be what it costs us to build your planes, plus a certain margin for our profits. All right, so it'd be cost plus. Right? So, but again, those situations tend to be relatively rare, and that's why these are only two special cases of price elasticity demand. A case where any change in the price leads to infinite change in quantity demanded, and the second case where any change in the price has no effect whatsoever on quantity demanded. Elasticity demand of infinite and elasticity demand equal to zero. Okay. So what can affect our responsiveness? What can impact how sensitive we are to changes in the price level? Remember when we're talking about way back in our macro days, we're talking about what can affect the demand for a good or service. Well, we're also now interested, what can affect the price elasticity of demand? Right? What can make us more sensitive or more responsive to change in the price level? And the first of these conditions or criteria, if you will, for what would affect our sensitivity is if there are a lot of close substitutes. What we're saying is that if there are close substitutes, then consumers are more likely to be much more sensitive or responsive to a change in the price level. But think about it. This happens because if there's close substitutes, a substitute just means that I can swap from one product into another product and be equally happy. All right. I go into a club and I want, I don't know, a Cooper Libre, all right, rum and Coke, all right. As long as they put enough rum in it, whether they give me rum and Coke or rum and Pepsi, I'm equally happy. Right? As long as the drink is the same price, whether it's rum and Coke or rum and Pepsi, if the drinks are the same price, I am perfectly happy. However, if I want a Cuba Libre and the rum and Coke is twice as expensive as the rum and Pepsi, well, it's the rum that's important to me. Yeah, I suck my teeth and, I get that rum and Pepsi and get it to the girl and she can be perfectly happy. All right. I bought her a drink, she happy, I talked to her all night. With close substitutes, any increase in price means that consumers can easily switch to other now relatively lower price substitutes. So the more close substitutes there are for good or service, the more elastic will be demand, or the greater will be its price elasticity of demand. So if there are a lot of close substitutes, then we don't have to take any increase in price. Right? We can quite easily switch over to something else. Boom. All right. We see this too in cases like bottled water. Yes, you have your preferred brand, but if they raise their price outrageously, listen, I'll switch. Now, this is very different for necessities or necessary goods that have fewer, if any, close substitutes. In such a case, demand would be inelastic because consumers will be less sensitive or responsive to changes in the price level. BPL raised the price, what do you call it? Fuel surcharge. What other options do you have? Nobody else around here generating electricity and willing to send it to your home for less. You're stuck with BPL. It's a necessity, and there aren't any close substitutes. Even if you have a generator, you can run it for a little bit, but the way the laws in the Bahamas are written, the generator is supposed to be run in times of emergency when the power's out. You can't use your generator as a substitute for your regular electricity usage. Also, you can't put a windmill in your backyard. So there are no close substitutes, so you're stuck, right? Which means you're less sensitive, less responsive to changes in the price level. Ain't nothing you can do. Right? So the first criteria, the first condition that affects how sensitive we are and how responsive we are to a change in the price level is that, do we have other options? The more options we have, the more responsive we will be if one of these people try to play with our pocketbooks. First, it's availability of close substitutes. Secondly, we're going to be responsive more or less depending on how much of our money, what proportion of our income is actually spent on this good or service. So the larger the proportion of income spent on a good, the more likely that consumers will be sensitive or responsive to a change in the price level, or the more elastic will be demand. We're saying, listen, you're going to be much more responsive, much more sensitive if your monthly mortgage payment went up by 25%, than if they decide to increase movie ticket prices by 25%. Because that bank is taking a much bigger chunk out of your paycheck than any kind of movie ticket. You may not like the fact that they've gone up on the price of movies by 25%, but it probably is not going to make a difference to you on the fact that you're going out for the evening. But let your mortgage payment or your rent payment increase by 25%, you won't burn down the bank. So certainly, the larger the proportion of our income that's spent on a good, the more likely it is that we will be sensitive or responsive to a change in the price level. And we measure that responsiveness or sensitivity by price elasticity demand, E of D. And thirdly, time. The more time that we as consumers have to adjust to a change in the price level, the more sensitive we will be to a change in that price level, or the more elastic will be demand. This only makes sense when you stop and think about it for a second. What we're saying is, let's say, for example, there's this big jump up in the price of gas overnight. Let's say right now gas is about $5. Say gas goes up, this is Thursday. Come Monday, gas is $9 a gallon. Shock, gasp, all over social media, yelling and screaming our heads off, right? But if we think that that's just a blip, and come week after next, we're going to be back down to $5, we can talk about this on social media, but it's not really going to change anything about what we do because we know the situation is temporary. Right? And because we're not going to do much about it, that's us being unresponsive or insensitive to that price change. Yeah, the price gone up, but it only went up for a week and it gone right back down. Yeah. And make no difference. I just ain't fill up my car that week. Or I did a little bit less driving that week, but fact of the matter is, I have no incentive to make any significant change because I know it's only temporary. And anytime we're saying we're not going to do anything, that means that we are unresponsive to that change in that price level. So, however, if that price gone up to $9 and it stays there, and there's no expectation that it's ever coming down again. So if the price increase lasts long enough, we're now going to have to make some serious decision on what we're going to do. Because you shouldn't be spending $100, $120 to fill up a tank of gas in a sedan. Ain't like this is some big truck or something. Right? So if the price increase lasts long enough, we will be more sensitive and more responsive to that price change, which means elasticity demand will increase. And we will see people deciding to drive less, buy more fuel efficient cars maybe, start, heaven forbid, taking, jitney, public transportation, carpooling, you're gonna have, you, your wife, and your 3 children, all y'all got a car in the driveway, carpooling, even moving closer to work, even buying a bicycle, or even giving up driving altogether. We know this is true because we've seen it happen in real life. Most of you are probably too young, including myself. In the early 70s, OPEC, that's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. These are Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, et cetera. They got vexed with the US, the West in general, but the US in particular, because, the US is the US, they're always gonna do what the US can do. So anyway, the OPEC countries decided that we're going to punish the US. At the time, the US got 80, 90% of its oil and its gas from the Middle East. Right? Gasoline, dirt cheap, $1 a gallon, less than $1 a gallon. US had big gas guzzling cars, Chrysler LeBarons, the LTDs, the cars that look like a boat, that's 12 feet long. You see them in these old black exploitation movies, the kind of stuff that Shaft drives, right? That gets maybe two miles a gallon or some nonsense. That's what were predominantly American vehicles at the time. And OPEC decided that we're gonna punish these suckers because to stay out of our business, let us kill whoever we want to kill and just mind your own business. And they imposed an oil embargo. Gas went from 80 cents a gallon to $4 a gallon. Americans lost their minds. But it stayed at $4 a gallon. So this wasn't a temporary thing. This went on for months. This went for almost 3 years. You know what happened? Americans who at the time never bought any foreign cars, because buy American, because support our country, and we're Americans and we're the best, whatever. They started buying Japanese cars, the Nissans, the Datsuns, the Hondas, the Toyotas, because at the time, Americans were turning up their nose at Japanese cars. Now, Japanese cars more efficient, smaller, lighter, and that has been the case ever since. Americans found out that Japanese can actually make good cars, and especially when you compare them to our cars, we didn't realize how crappy our cars was until somebody sold us some good cars. And the Japanese and then the Koreans have had a foothold in the US car market ever since. And all of this was because of this gasoline crisis. OPEC decided to impose this oil embargo on the United States. Even after the US convinced OPEC, think a lot of arms sales, a lot of bombing and whatever, because how the US, they do their business. even after the embargo ended, the damage was already done. Americans were already getting rid of their gas guzzling vehicles, buying cheaper, more fuel efficient cars, investing more in public transportation. The whole ride sharing and carpooling thing came about, where now you have you and your neighbor will take turns dropping the kids into school and picking them up. Yeah. Americans became more responsive, more sensitive over time. But it took time. And the more time that this problem went on, the more responsive they were to this high price. So that's what we mean when we say time has an effect on elasticity of demand. Okay. Now let's play with some math. Any questions first before we move on? Okay, so how do we go about calculating elasticity? We said that what we're looking at, elasticity demand, says that if I change my price by a certain percent, how much does my quantity demanded, or how much does my sales change in percentage terms? So elasticity is a product of the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So, and to calculate the percentage change, I'm sure you are familiar with the fact that it's always new minus old divided by old. New minus old divided by old. So it'll be new quantity minus old quantity divided by the old quantity, new price minus old price divided by old price. And you also would have recalled all the way back from your high school days, you always saw what's in the brackets first. So you always solve Q1 minus Q0 before you divide by Q0. Okay. Where Q1 is the new quantity, Q0 is the old quantity or the previous quantity, P1 is the new price, and P0 is the previous price. Basically, we're talking about plugging and chugging, plugging in numbers and solving it using your calculator by all means, please. A lot of this stuff you can't do by hand. Right. So let's try an example.
Mr. Merritt.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to give us copies of these slides?
Am I going to give you copies of?
The slides.
Oh, the slides.
Yeah.
This should be in your notebooks, you know.
Okay.
All right. I know because I wrote the notebooks. You should be able to get notebooks like come along with this class from the school.
Okay.
In addition, the school records all the classes. So you can go on their YouTube site and you can see the micro class again.
All right, sorry, I missed the first class, but just a quick question. I get the book from Ms. Dean, but in terms of the exams and stuff, you sent us an outline with that?
The exams. I might as well quickly, before we start jumping into some sweet math. Okay. Here. You have two exams, interim exam, final exam. Both are in person, so both are going to be taken up at the institute. I haven't set the date for the interim exam yet, though I tend to put that relatively close to the end of the semester, so that there's not a lot of work between the end of your interim exam and your final exam. I'll see how that goes. Last day of class is August 26th. Final exam is the 31st. You get homework. I will try every week. I've never actually succeeded in giving one every week, but I keep promising to try. Your first one will go out tomorrow. Homework is worth 30%, interim exam worth 30%, final exam is 40%. I may or may not play around with another 5% for class participation, which usually means If you're on the border of another grade, I'll bump you up. Does that help?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions before we go on to some lovely, delicious? No? Really, you guys are not excited about the math thing, man.
Yes, we got a calculator first.
No, you calculator on your phone or on your, if you're using a laptop or if you use an iPad, works.
Okay. Any of your questions on the exams will be multiple choice?
Yes. I usually include some multiple choice for definitions. Not as much as if you've taken macro with me, not as much as in macro. Micro is a lot more quantitative. Yeah, so it tends to be more working out stuff compared to macro. But we'll see. Okay. Why? See, I've been doing macro for too long, and now I'm heading up my slides macro. Anyway, I'll fix it after class. I'll go through all of them. So here's our first example. We'll take it slow. Let's say you have a shoe store, all right? And the manager of this shoe store prices his shoes at $110 a pair. One particular brand of shoes, $110 a pair, and she has sold 200 pairs of these shoes in a given period of time. Okay, fine. Next year, seasonal sales, she increases the price of her shoes from $110 to $125. I don't know why she wanted to do that, but she did. As you would expect, according to the law of demand, price went up, so we expect quantity demanded to go down. And in fact, her sales fell from 200 pairs of shoes to 180 pairs of shoes. Right? Her price went from 110 to 125, her sales fell from 200 to 180 pairs of shoes. So you will get word problems like this, all right? And the problem will ask you, determine the price elasticity demand for shoes, and it will ask you to answer the question, is demand elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic? All right. So the first thing we said to solve this, we need to plug in values for all of these letters that we have here. So we want to be able to identify what is Q1, what is Q0, what is P1, and what is P0. Now we said that Q1 is the new quantity. So that we would go to our word problem and we're looking for a new quantity.
The new quantity is 180. Oh.
Right, because this is what happens afterwards. So our new quantity is 180. So that means our old quantity is 200. And the new price would be, where are we? New
125.
Price, 125, and that makes the old price 110. So let's plug those in. Right. 180 is the Q1, right? And 200 is Q0 divided by 200. 125 is P1. 110 is P0 divided by P0. So that looks right. So then, we said we saw what's in the brackets first. So we have 180 minus 200 gives you a minus amount, right?
Negative 20.
Negative 20. So we have negative 20 divided by 200. And on the bottom, 125 minus 10 is 15, positive 15. So positive 15 divided by 110. All right. So we end up with minus 20 divided by 200 and 15 divided by 110. Somebody please confirm my numbers for me, please. What's 20 divided by 200?
Negative 0.1.
Okay, now let's stick a pin in there right now. For this class, this entire class, whenever you come up with a number, a value, 4 decimal places, please. 4 decimal places. Always 4 decimal places. That way,
I remember
we make
from
sure.
macro.
Oh, you remember from macro?
Yep, I remember how you go, Mr. Demary.
There is no doubt, no question, and you do not round until, if you want to round at all, the very, 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 very last number you present to me. But since this is micro, you don't round beyond, unless it's beyond 4 decimal places. So for example, here it's negative 0.1000 to 4 decimal places. And so what's 15 divided by 110, please?
0.136363.
Okay, so 636. And that means that 6 turns to 3 to 4. So the 4 decimal places, we end up at 0.1364. Okay. And finally, 0.1000 divided by 0.1364.
So, Mr. Demary, my calculator gave me negative 0.1. So should I add the zeros?
Okay. You add the 3 zeros.
Okay.
You just want to make sure that your calculator is not rounding on your behalf.
Okay.
Somebody's blowing out the tunes. Thank you very much. So then we have 0.1000 or 0.1, if that's what your calculator is saying, divided by 0.1364. Anybody got something different than what I got?
No.
So you notice a negative divided by a positive, it's a negative. Positive divided by positive, positive, negative divided by negative is a positive. Okay, so we end up with an E of D of negative 0.7331. And that is not a percentage, that is a value. One other thing to note, price elasticity demand, E of D, is always expressed as an absolute value. So even though our answer comes out to negative, you see where you put the 2 bars on either side? That says that I'm expressing this number in absolute value terms. So there's no negatives in an absolute value term. And those 2 lines says that I know the number calculated to be negative, but my answer is supposed to be in absolute value terms. But for price elasticity demand, absolute value. Other elasticities, which we probably won't get to this evening, may not be in absolute value terms. Right? So we can't just assume that every answer is going to be expressed in absolute value terms. Only elasticity of demand, E of D. Okay. So that we have found that the elasticity for these shoes is 0.7331. Question: is demand elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic? Let me go up. What was our answer? 0.7331. We said elastic demand
Inelastic
is greater than 1, inelastic is less than 1, unit elastic is exactly equal to 1. So we came up with an answer of 0.7331, which is less than 1. So therefore, it is inelastic demand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Fine. So this is one of the things that, you know, I sometimes encourage students to put on the side of their notebooks just to remind themselves, elastic demand, EFD greater than 1, inelastic, EFD less than 1, unit, EFD equal to 1. That way you don't always have to refer back to your notes, but you know, that's entirely up to you. Okay, so we now calculated an EFD of 0.7331. Great stuff, wonderful, sounds good. Oh, here's our answer. We have EFD of absolute value 0.7331, and we said demand is inelastic because EFD is less than 1. So that's our answer. Now, hold on to that thought a second. Let's take a detour for a moment and talk about how revenue is affected in this, our new understanding of elasticity and sensitivity. Some of the things we already know. We know for any firm, revenue is their income. All right? And firms use their revenue as income to purchase factory production, materials and labor, as well as to pay rent, make lease payments, mortgage payments, etc. Revenue is a combination of sales of goods, how much goods you sold, multiplied by the price that was paid for those goods. So revenue is generated from the sales of goods and services and the price of those goods and services. So revenue is price times quantity. If you sell 10 items for $100 a piece, you have made $1,000. 10 times 100. Right? So therefore, revenue is the product of price and quantity demanded. So let's also remind ourselves from the law of demand, we know that price and quantity demanded are inversely or negatively related, which means they move in opposite directions to each other. However, if we're going to try and understand how revenue changes, whether it goes up or go down, whether there's a change in the price, it's not quite so simple. It is not true that all you need to do is raise your price and your revenue goes up. Okay. To determine how revenue changes when there's a change in the price, we must compare how price changes to the rate of change in which our sales changes. In other words, we look at the percentage change in price and compare it to the percentage change in quantity demanded. Always saying, it may be that you raise your price and your revenue goes up. That is certainly possible. We're not going to say that's not possible. But it's also possible that you raise your price, scare off a ton of customers, and your revenue goes down. How do we know? So how do you know whether raising your price is going to cause your revenue to go up or is going to scare away your customers and cause your revenue to fall? The only way we can know that is we look at a percentage change in price and compare it to the percentage change in quantity demanded or our sales. So then, follow me here. Let's start with elastic demand. We said demand is said to be elastic if consumers are very responsive or very sensitive to change in the price. You start playing around with that price and they're going to respond. Right? Quick, fast, and in a hurry. They are very sensitive to price changes in your product. Right? Demand for your product is elastic. This particular product is elastic. So then, what happens when you raise your price? So in practical terms, as a firm increases its price, it finds that it loses customers and sales even faster than the income gained from the price increase. The result is that revenue falls because any increase in income due to increase in price, so any money you get from raising your price is more than offset by your loss in customers and sales. So we can see here, price went up, but look at how quantity went down even much more. Price went up, quantity went down more. The result is revenue falls. You did something seriously stupid. You misjudge your customers and you misjudge their sensitivity to changes in your price. You raise your price and your sales fell through the floor. So any money you make from the added income from raising your price is more than offset by all the sales that you lost. P rises, but QD falls by a larger degree and therefore revenue falls. So it's important, if you think about it, it's important for a company to know if each product that they're trying to sell, whether demand for that product is elastic, inelastic, or unilastic, because if it is elastic, raising the price is not the thing to do. The reverse, of course, is also true. If you have a product whose demand is elastic, you have a little sale, even a tiny little sale. If the firm lowers its price, it finds that the sales rise even faster than the decline in prices. People are so shocked that, you mean actually having a sale? Ooh, 70 shop having sale. I gotta go at least look. The result is that revenue rises because any loss of income due to reduction in price is more than offset by all these extra customers and additional sales. Sure, you have a sale, so the price falls, but demand increases by a larger degree, and therefore revenue goes up. So if you know that demand for your product is elastic, you don't want to raise the price, you want to have a sale. I don't know if there's a company still existing in the Providence. It's called, it's a shoe store. It used to be on Bay Street. I don't know how familiar you are with Old Bay Street. There was a flower store called Petal Pushers, going towards East Bay Street, and then there was a Rubens. That's it, Rubens. Rubens used to have sale, seemed like every month. Inventory sale, going out of business sale, summer sale, back to school sale, Easter sale, Christmas sale, January sale. Ooh, it's March sale, Valentine's sale. But they knew that demand for their product, shoes, in this case, is elastic. Some shoes, but certainly their shoes. And they knew that a small increase in price would encourage a lot more people to come to their store. Elastic demand. Know your product. Right? What about inelastic demand? If the demand for your product is inelastic, consumers are very unresponsive or insensitive to changes in the price level. More specifically, demand is said to be inelastic if you can raise your price, but quantity demanded doesn't fall by the same percentage. So in practical terms, if you're in the fortunate position of having a product whose demand is inelastic, that is, consumers are insensitive or unresponsive to changes in the price, a firm may increase its prices substantially, a la KFC, maybe, and still lose relatively fewer customers and sales. And any loss in sales is more than made up for by the extra money you get from the price rise. So if you have a product whose demand is inelastic, you can raise your price, and if you look at, see in our little box, our quantity fell by a much smaller amount. Price went up, quantity only fell by a small amount. Quantity demand is always going to fall because of the lower demand, but it doesn't have to fall a lot. If people are unresponsive or insensitive to change in the price level. And that's what we see here. All right? You were able to raise your price, but demand doesn't fall a lot, probably because your product is a necessity, perhaps. But whatever is the case, the demand is inelastic. Then the last thing you want to do then, if demand for your product is inelastic, why would you have a sale? There's no need for a sale. And in fact, having a sale is going to hurt you. If you were to lower your price, you can find it doesn't really do a lot to boost your sales. If a firm lowers its price, it finds that its sales do not rise by the same degree. Yeah, you're going to have some extra sale, but not a lot. The result is that your revenue is going to go down because there's not a sufficient increase in customers and sales to offset the money lost because you dropped your price. Right? Price falls, yeah, quantity demand rises, but by a smaller degree, and therefore overall revenue is going to fall. If demand for your product is inelastic, you need to know that the way to make money is not to have a sale. The way to make money is to raise your price. If your demand is elastic, the reverse is true. And finally, what about unit elastic demand? Demand is said to be unit elastic if a 1% change in the price leads to a change in quantity demanded of exactly 1%. You raise your price by 1%, you lose 1% in sales. You drop your price by 5%, your sales go up by 5%. What does that mean for revenue? Well, nothing. So in practical terms, a firm may increase its price, quantity demanded will fall by the exact same percentage, and if the firm lowers its price, quantity demanded will still change by the exact same percentage. The result is whether you raise your price or lower your price, your revenue is going to remain unchanged. It is a horrible position to be in. If you have a product whose demand is unit elastic, there's no way to make any extra money from that product. You can't raise your price and make any extra money because when you raise your price, you lose exactly the same amount in sales. You can't lower your price and make any money because any money you lose by lowering your price is exactly matched by the same amount of money you make from increasing sales. The result is your revenue stays flat, unchanged. And that's what that bar on top of your R means, unchanged. Right? It is a terrible, terrible, terrible situation because there is no strategy you could employ to improve your position. You can't raise price hoping to make more money, and you can't have a sale hoping to increase the money coming in. Neither works. So that's why I'm saying, when we talk about micro, we're trying to look at this from the market perspective, from the perspective of the firms. So from the firm's perspective, the first thing you want to know is that what kind of product am I selling? Forget the brand name. I want to know for sure what the elasticity of demand is for my product. Is my product elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic? Because that's going to determine what I need to do if I'm going to boost revenue. Okay. With that detour out of the way, oh, what did I do? Eesh. Oh, yes, this is our same example. Hang on, folks. Let's see if I can fix this because I see my values are not available. And I want, oh, here you go. All right, let's see. I'm hoping that's it. Copy.
Carla said to tell you her internet dropped, Mr. Tamara.
Yeah, That may be me, that may be BPL, I don't know, somebody. Yes, okay, so let's delete that and insert. Pay special. Okay, here you are. Okay, good. Yes. All right. So from our last example, when we looked at it, this is the shoe manager problem. Previously, we determined that the price elasticity demand for a product when the price changes. In other words, we looked at how quantity demand change along a stretch or an arc of the demand curve. So when we're talking about price elasticity demand, we said we're looking at how sensitive consumers were when the price changed from $1 to from $110 to $125. And we saw that is associated with a change in the amount of sales from 200 to 180 pairs. So if you look at our demand function, our demand curve, we were really dealing with this little stretch along our demand curve. I'm hoping you can see that. It's a little piece in green. So all we're doing at this stage is that we were looking at the elasticity or the sensitivity of consumers when the price changed from 110 to 125. And we found that consumers were insensitive. All right. The demand along that stretch is inelastic by 0.7331 or 332, I think, depending on your calculator. I think it's supposed to be 331. I don't know where I got 332 from. So we were able to calculate the price elasticity demand along this stretch or this arc of the demand curve to be negative 0.7331, which we then converted to an absolute value of 0.7331, positive. Right? So we just want to remind ourselves that we calculated elasticity along this stretch of the demand curve between $110 and $125 and 180 and 200 pairs of shoes. But let's say the owner of the store came along, saw what the manager did and said, okay, this ain't gonna work. Fix this or go. So let's assume that the manager wanted to reverse her decision and go back to the $110. Here's the question for you. Should we expect sales to go back to 200? The answer, of course, is that without any additional information, sure. There's no reason to think it shouldn't. Because what you said is that when you raise your price by $15, your sales fell by 20 pairs of shoes. So if you lower your price by $15, your sales should go up by 20 pairs of shoes. Right? That makes logical sense unless somebody giving you some information that makes you think otherwise. Right? So if we assume that the manager wishes to reverse her decision and lowers the price back to $100, shouldn't we expect sales to go back to 200 pairs? And if that doesn't happen, then what does it mean by elasticity? What we should do as an exercise, because we think it should be the same, because we went from 110 to 125, we're going back from 125 back to 110. We went from 200 to 180 pairs of shoes. We're going back from 180 to 200 pairs of shoes. We're going back to our original position. So one would expect that the elasticity, because we didn't change, we're still working with the same stretch of our demand curve. So whether we're moving up or down this stretch, elasticity should be the same. But what happens when we actually take a moment and work out the elasticity when we go back? So here's our calculation. The manager issue store reverses a previous decision. So now then, if she's reversed her previous decision, would our Q1 and Q0 not change? Let's see if I can go back a second. All right. Here was our Q1 was 180. Sorry, our Q1, which was the new quantity, was 180, and our old quantity was 200. But now that we're going back, wouldn't our new be 200 and our old be 180? Yes? No? Am I crazy? Somebody help me, please. Oh. All we're saying is, okay, let's go back a second. Let me pull something from here. Here, okay? Let's take this, oops. And let's take these, copy, go back to our conversation. Okay. And let's put them here. Oops. I'm making a mess, but that's fine. Okay. So now, oops, that's a mistake. Okay. All right. I took this from our previous example, where we have Q1 was our new price, because remember, this is the new, not new price. This was the amount of sales after we raised the price. And this was the sales before we raised the price. This is the new price. This was the old price from our previous example. Now we're saying that the store manager goes back on this change. So that must mean that the new price, doesn't the new price have to be now to 200? Somebody say something. Fine. I'm going to take the bullet by the horn, and I'm going to say the new price is at 200. Because, okay, she raised her price from $110 to $125 in 2020. So in 2019, let's say, for example, the price was $110. 2019, the price was $110. 2020, the price was $125. So it makes sense at that point that the old price, the 2019 price, the 2019 price was 110. The 20 price was 119. 2019 quantity was 200. And the 2020 quantity was 180. Everybody agree with me so far? That's what we had at the beginning. But what happens in 2021? In 2021, she went back to where she was in 2019. So doesn't that mean the price that we saw in 2020 now becomes the old price?
Yes.
And the quantity we saw in 2020 now becomes the old quantity because we're now in 2021. All right. So that means then that quantity, that Q1 is now 200, Q0 is 180, the new Q0, the new P1 is 110, the new P1 is 125. So all we did, we went back up this curve. And if we do the calculation, I certainly encourage you to do the calculation. We end up with 200 minus 180 is now a positive 20, whereas last time it was negative 20. So it's positive 20 divided by 80. Let me make this easy on myself, if not on you. Where's our calculation? Is it here? Okay, let me copy that whole slide. And paste. Okay. So here's our old calculation. 180 minus 200 divided by 200. Now our new calculation would be 200 minus 180 divided by 180. So instead of 180 minus 200 divided by 200, we end up with 200 minus 180 divided by 180. So we, instead of having negative 20 divided by 200, this is on the top line, we now have a positive 20 divided by 180, because 200 minus 180 is 20. And on the price side, we went from 125 minus 100 divided by, 125 minus 110 divided by 110. We end up with 110 minus 125 divided by 125. You see how everything is switched around. And that gives us 15 divided by 125, whereas before we had 15 divided by 110. Right. And somebody test my calculator, please. What's 20 divided by 180? I got 0.11111111111.
That's right.
Okay. And what's 15 divided by 125, knowing that the answer is going to be negative?
Negative 1.2. Then you add the
Negative
zeros.
0.1200. Fine. Then we need 0.11111 divided by 0.1200.
That's right.
Negative 0.9258. And we convert it to absolute value because it's elasticity of demand. Do you see the problem? When we increased the price, we had elasticity along this stretch of the demand curve of negative 7.331. When we lower the price, elasticity along this exact same stretch of the demand curve was negative 0.9258. Granted, it's still inelastic because it's less than 1, but it's not the same. So how is it that elasticity is different if I raise my price compared to if I lower my price? by the same amount. It ain't like I raised my price by a different amount. She raised the price by $15 and then turned around and lowered it by the exact same $15. Her sales fell off by 20 units. And then when she lowered the price, her sales went up by exactly the same 20 units. So every bit of logic should say that elasticity along that stretch should be the same. But somehow this is telling us that people are less sensitive to her raising the price than they're lowering the price. They're more responsive when she lowered the price, not terribly responsive, it's still inelastic. So what we're saying is that here we have reworked our elasticity formula given the store manager's change of heart. And even though she reversed her decision exactly as she did before, the results and elasticity are different. If you're confused, you are not the only one who was confused by this. Economists, mathematicians, etc., all for a long time, this does not make sense. You can't have this kind of confusion. Right? And it is precisely this type of confusion that made economists say, you know what, we need a better, more precise way of calculating elasticity. Because this current formula we have here is causing problems, it's causing confusion. You're going up one direction. Yes, sir.
Are you saying it should have been one, considering the same quantity and price was turned over from the previous year?
Doesn't it make sense that it should be the same?
No, I'm asking, should it be one, or is it a bad thing that it's under 1%? Or
No, it's not the value, and that's the issue here, is that the values are different. Let me put it this way, all right? Should you walk 200 steps and make it a certain distance, turn around and walk back 200 steps, should you expect the distance to be the same?
not really.
Why wouldn't it be different?
Because I might not take the same calculated meters in my steps.
Yeah, and that imprecision in your steps would apply in both directions, wouldn't it?
Not 100%. It's other variables. What was my pace? What's the meters between each step, etc.
Let me refine it for you. 200 steps in one direction today. 200 steps in that same direction tomorrow, the day after for the next 5 years. And 200 steps coming back day after day for the next 5 years. So any of the variables that you're talking about would average out. Would you agree?
In most cases, yes, sir.
So then why wouldn't the distance walked be the same? Going and coming. It should be. And that's the issue that we have with this way of calculating elasticity.
I get
We're
it.
saying,
Okay.
yeah, it's supposed to be the same. You went up $15, you came back down $15. Your sales fell 20, your sales now return 20. I mean, it should be the same. And it took a very long time for economists to realize, mathematicians firstly, was that the problem wasn't in the concept. The problem was the math wasn't precise enough. As messy as this elasticity calculation that we have here, percentage change in quantity, percentage divided by percentage change in price, it's just not good enough. That's the problem. I said, okay, we need to go out and find a better elasticity formula, or one that's more precise. And that brings us to where we are now. right, what is called the midpoint formula. And yes, it's even more messy than the previous formula we just looked at. And let's see if I can make it even bigger. All right. All right. The midpoint formula. Right. And so the midpoint formula takes the same quantities, Q1 and Q0, but then takes the average of them and the absolute value of them, and then divides the average by the value. Let's go back a second. So you see this stretch of the curve that has us concerned. Yeah, and going in different directions ends up yielding a different elasticity. What the midpoint formula is saying is that you take the absolute distance between this point and that point, and between the 2 points on this arc, this piece of the demand function, demand curve. Right? So you take the absolute distance from 110 to 125, that's 15. Right? And then you take the average distance between 110 and 125, which would be somewhere in the middle here. Right? So what we're saying is that if you take the absolute difference going and coming, it may be different, but if you take the absolute distance and the average distance, back to your steps example, and you're quite right, some of your steps may be different in length than other steps. Right? But if I count your total number of steps and the average distance of each step, does that not refine my calculation of how far you've walked? So I am no longer, I'm not just depending on how many steps you take, but I'm also calculating the average distance of each step that you're taking. So I am refining the way I'm trying to determine how far you have gone and how far you're coming back. And that should give me a better feel for the total distance that you've walked. And we're trying to do the same thing for our elasticity. We're saying we're going to measure the total distance between the 2 points on this arc, the two ends of this stretch of our curve. So, and to do that, we look at the absolute distance between 125 and 110. And we also look at the average distance between 125 and 110. Because so if you think about it, the absolute difference between 125 and 110 is 15. But the average between 125 and 110 is 235 divided by 2, which is 117 and a half. Right? And when we use those two numbers, we're then able to get a better, more precise answer for our elasticity problem. And if we've done this right, we should get the same answer whether we are increasing or going up along this curve or coming down along this curve. We should get the same elasticity answer. And that is really the key to saying whether we've done this right, whether our concept of refining our elasticity formula makes sense. It only can make sense if it yields an answer that says, here's the same elasticity, whether you're increasing your price by $15 or you're lowering your price by $15, and whether your sales are increasing by 20 pairs of shoes or whether your sales is falling by 20 pairs of shoes. So whether you are going up along this demand curve or coming down along this demand curve, elasticity is going to be the same at any point on that curve. That is any point on that arc. For most of you, this is your first exposure to elasticity calculation of this type. You would have calculated percentage change before, this is percentage change raised to a different power, if you will. The only way you can get through this is that you do not get caught up in how it looks. You say, I know what Q1 is. I know what Q0 is. I know what P1 is supposed to be. I know what P0 is supposed to be. So all I'm going to do is plug them in. And then whatever the answer come out, that's what it is. I'm just going to make sure that I put the right number in the right place. So let's see how that works out. All right. So here's our new, what we call our midpoint formula. And the midpoint formula we're saying is an improvement in the way we calculate our elasticity demand. So here's my midpoint formula. And you're going to work it out with me. We're talking about a price increase. So this is her first action. This is the store manager in terms of what she is doing. All right. Now, since you said, guys, so you don't have your notes, your book, so I need to, okay, here. We said in our first step, let me put this, tab, no. Okay. Oops. All right. So in her first action, we determined that this was the Q1 and the Q0 and the P1 and the P0. Any objections? Now it's time before we move on. This was what we got from our first example where she raised her price from $110 to $125. And her quantity, her sales fell from 200 to 180 pairs of shoes. Yes?
Yes, no objections, but the divided by 2 is fixed to that equation, right?
What do you mean?
Like how you have Q0 plus Q1 divided by 2. That's fixed, or the 2 variates based on, I guess, the units, or?
Here's the formula. I just said, I'm not going to do any deep thinking about this. I'm just going to plug in the numbers and solve. This is the formula that he gave me, so this is what I'm working with. That's your mindset.
Okay.
All right. So I know from my word problem that this is my Q's and these are my P's. So I'm going to take his formula and I'm going to plug them in and see what happens. Q1 was 180. Q0 was 200. This one, Q0 is 200. Q1 is 180. All right. Is that too small? Let's see what happens. Let me, no, I don't want to do that because I may need those. Okay, maybe I can take this one. No, let's not do that. Why don't we do this? Tab, and take this and put it there. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm not going to mess it up. Okay. P1 was what? P1 was 125. You know, you guys can help me by reading it out to me while I don't have to deal with it myself, but okay, fine, I'll make you do it all by myself. P0 was 110. Okay, I see the problem. All right, P0 we said was 110. Don't worry, you're gonna have to deal with this on your own when I'm done. And P1 is 125. All right, okay. All right, so I'm hoping, and you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but I plugged in my numbers in their correct places. Q1 is 180. So Q1 is 180. It's Q1 minus Q0. So 180 minus 200. Q0 plus Q1, which is 200 plus 180 divided by 2. P1 minus P0 is 125 minus 110. And P0 plus P1 divided by 2 is 110 plus 125 divided by 2. So it looks like I have everything in its right place. So let's do some calculations, please, folks. 180 minus 200, we did that already. That is minus 20.
Yes.
All right, fine. Now, this part, 200 plus 180 divided by 2. I got 190.
That's right.
No, not 9, 190. 190. All right. P1 minus P0. That's at 15. 125 minus 110 is 15. You know, I got the bright idea in my head that we would actually do this together. Silly me. Yeah.
We just watching.
Yeah, right. And P0 plus P1 divided by 2 is 110 plus 125 divided by 2, which gives me what, 112.5?
11, what I put? I gotta go on.
How am I messing this up?
You get 117 divided by, 117.5.
All right, let's see. All right, so we have 125 plus 110 gives me 235. You're right, it is 117. 117.5. Oh, okay, fine. If that's the way you want to play it. Let's take this out. What's 20 divided by 190? And it's going to be a negative number.
Negative 0.1,
0.
negative 1052. 1053, sorry.
What's after the 2?
6.
So negative 0.1053. All right, and on the bottom I have 15 divided by 117.5.
0.1277.
0.12777. What's after the 7?
6.
So wouldn't that be 7, 8?
No, it's 7. It's
Oh, it was-
12765.
Okay, okay, I got you now. All right, fine. So we end up in our numerator, that's the top, was negative 0.1053, and our denominator on the bottom, 0.1277. Our answer then is what? Negative 0.1053, negative
0.8246.
So it's 4, 5 and change.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what was after the 5?
8.
So negative 0.8246. And you immediately see what your biggest problem is going to be. Yeah. Your biggest problem is going to be plugging in the right numbers into the right place. All right, fine. But we're not even halfway there yet. Well, we're halfway there. Because what we've done, we've calculated the elasticity when she increases her price. Now we want to calculate, so that's going up our demand curve. So what happens now when she reverses her decision and she goes back down the demand curve? What happens to the elasticity when she's going down, back down the demand curve? Right. So that's what we have here. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So then, you bright folks, what is her new Q1 now that she's going back down the demand curve? You tell me, I'm going to plug it in.
I don't remember.
Here's what it was when she went up the demand curve. All right. So what you want to do then is whatever her original quantity and price was, those would now be her new quantity and price. And what was her new quantity and price now becomes her old quantity and price, because she reversed everything.
200.
Okay. All right. So then our new Q1 it would be 200. Right. Then by a process of elimination, our new Q0 must be 180, right? So we end up with now 180 plus 200 divided by 2. Okay, so what is the new price, P1? Is that 110?
110.
110. Oops, come on, don't do that. 110. And our old price would have been 125. All right, so we end up with now 125 plus 110 divided by 2. Okay. So what's 200 minus 180?
20.
Positive 20, right? And 180.
190, the same thing.
180 plus 200 divided by 2, 190?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, Lord, come on. All right. 110 minus 125 is
Negative 15.
negative 15. All right. And here we have, not you. 125 plus 110 divided by 2. That's that same 170.5 again?
Mm-hmm.
117.5. All right. So then, what's 20 divided by 190?
0.1053.
0.1053. And what's negative 15 divided by 117.5?
Negative 0.1277.
0.1277. All right, and we end up with an answer of what?
Same thing, negative 0.8246.
8246. All right, and what did we get in the last one?
That's the same thing?
8246, negative 824. Yes, it is the same thing. We want it to be the same thing.
Oh.
Because we remember what our problem was. Our problem was that whether she increased her price or lower her price, we will see two different elasticities along the same stretch. Right? Because our problem was that it didn't make sense to us that if she increases her price by $15, she had a one elasticity. And if she lower her price by the same $15, she had a different elasticity. Right? That's confusion. Right? So we said we needed a better way of calculating price elasticity demand that would give us the same answer whether you're increasing or decreasing by the same amount. It's different if you're changing the price, but it's saying $15 in either direction. And what we've found is that with this midpoint formula, it's a lot more messy, a lot more complicated, but it's more precise. And it allows us to do what we think makes common sense. It makes common sense that the elasticity along this stretch of the demand curve, this stretch here, should be the same, whether you're going up along this stretch or coming down along this stretch. Right? Whether the price went up by $15 or came down by $15, the elasticity along this stretch should be the same. And if we just use our standard percentage calculation, our standard midpoint, our standard elasticity formula, it doesn't work. And we're talking about it now in 2021, but believe me, this was a 15, 20-year head scratcher for mathematicians, for economists. We can figure out why it didn't work the way we know it was supposed to work. Along this stretch, or any stretch of our demand curve, if you're going up and down, you should have the same elasticity. So the midpoint formula allows us to achieve that. So when you have your new homework come next week, you will only use the midpoint formula in those calculations. Right? And in this entire class, you will never, ever, 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 ever go back to that old formula. Right? That old formula was to show you something that you would recognize, and you would have seen the calculating percentages at some point in your life.
So that
whether
wouldn't
in high
even,
school or in your macro days. Sorry,
so
there was a question.
The old one wouldn't even be on the exam.
It wouldn't even be on the exam.
So you just wanted to go through it with us.
If I just throw the midpoint formulas at you right off the bat, all right, it was going to blow up your brain. That's why you had to ease your toe into the hot water. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Okay, we're almost there. We're going to finish elasticity today, and then we're not going to go beyond that today, because it's enough to take in on one sitting. Now, we've talked about measuring elasticity along a stretch. So when you raise the price or lower the price, right, your quantity demanded changes. Right? So we're talking about a stretch along the aggregate, along the demand curve. That stretch we call an arc. An arc of the demand curve is just simply a piece, a stretch of the demand curve, and we've measured elasticity along that stretch. All right. However, there are times when, in some very special cases, we're not so much interested in a stretch, we're interested in finding the price elasticity of demand at a specific price. What is the elasticity of my product if I were to charge this price? So I'm not focusing so much on the responsiveness or the sensitivity of customers when I change my price. I want to know what the sensitivity is to this particular price that I have existing now. Right? That's the question. Oh, that's not right. Something's wrong there. But anyway, hopefully, let's see, did I correct it? I did correct it. Okay. Right. In some very special cases, we're interested in finding the price elasticity of demand at a specific price rather than due to a change in price. In order to do this, we have a much simpler formula called the point elasticity demand formula, which you would see sometimes if you do any of your reading or if you go online, you would see this midpoint formula often referred to as the arc formula because it measures elasticity along an arc or a stretch of the demand curve, whereas here we're looking at the point elasticity demand formula, or we're measuring elasticity at a specific point on the demand curve. So the formula for point elasticity of demand is dq/dp times P over Q. Now, if either in your high school days, probably your 11th or 12th grade, or in your introductory math course, you would have started looking at some calculus, or what they call differentials. You know, and usually students run away from it because they think calculus is this enormously hard, I'll never get it kind of subject. That's not really the case. You know, it may not be as fun as it is, you know. Anyway, dq/dp is what we call the differential equation. This says that if you have a demand curve, like how we have here, QD, this dq/dp, whatever this is the value of the slope of that curve. This tells us how steep or how flat that curve is. That's all that does. All right. Later on in the semester, we will play around with very quick and rules for differentiation. But for now, all we're interested in is that this thing here, this dq/dp part of our formula, all that refers to, it only refers to the slope of our demand curve. The P is our regular P, meaning price, and Q is our regular Q, meaning quantity demanded. So the point elasticity demand formula says it's equal to the slope of the demand curve, whatever that value happened to be, times P over Q. Again, let's try it out and see how it works. Let's say, for example, I gave you, and I will give you in your homework, I will give you a demand function. In this case, QD equals 125 minus 5P. You've seen demand functions like this for a long time. Very straightforward, very simple. All right. We know that if we plug in a P at any point, we can find out what quantity demand would be at that price. Fine. Now, we're telling you that DQDP is always that value that's right in front of the P. So all you need to do is look at the demand equation, Q equals 125 minus 5P, and that whole DQDP, there's nothing to calculate. All it says is that that DQDP is the value that's right in front of the P, that is immediately preceding in the P. And in this example, that is -5. Don't forget the negative sign. Because that 5 is not sitting there by itself, that's -5. Because your formula is 125 minus 5P. So -5. So DQDP, I tell you that at the same time, I actually put a 5 in there when it should be -5. And let's assume that at this point on the demand curve, P is equal to $8. $8. So you would have to be given, in any problem that you're asked to solve, you would have to be given the demand equation, and you would have to be given a value for P. And you plug those into your formula. Your formula is E of D is dQdP times P over Q, and see what comes out. If you plug your P equals 8 into your demand equation, you end up with 125 minus 5 times 8. And it gives you a Q of 5 8s of 40. 125 minus 40 gives you 85. Easy enough. DQDP, we said we just pick it up straight from the equation. We look at the equation and we're looking for the values immediately preceding the P. So we now know DQDP is -5. P, they gave it to us as 8, and we worked out the Q to be 85. Now we have everything we need to just plug into our formula. The QDP we said is -5, so we plug that in. P is 8, we plug the 8 in. Q we worked out to be 85, so we plug that in. Somebody with a calculator, please. What is 8 divided by 85? And don't lose the result, don't clear the result out of your calculator.
0.0941.
And then multiply that by 5.
0.4706.
Yeah, all right, so that's it. For the point elasticity demand formula, that's all. Right? It is not a difficult formula to work with. DQDP, you take it straight out of your demand equation. They must give you P, and you just need to calculate Q and then plug everything into your formula. You will have time and opportunities to have quite a bit of practice. All right, so that is where we're going to stop today. I know it's a lot, and elasticity can be daunting at first, but I can guarantee you this much. The more you work, the more problems you solve. And this is all about repetition. Then it becomes less challenging because you know that basically this is plug and chug. It's going to, the concentration, the effort is going to be required to put the right numbers in the right place. Right? That's where the effort is going to come in, plug and chug. All right, so questions?
Yeah, I was looking at the last point you said. It would basically be putting the right numbers into the right place. What I was looking at.
Yeah. Okay. And here you saw what we did with the midpoint formula. You see how hard it was for us to just simply take our time and make sure get the numbers in the right place.
Right.
Yeah. And because we're dealing with math, there's very little sort of, midpoint, mid-grades, half points, half marks. Yeah, it's right or it's wrong. Right? And that's why I'm strongly urging you 4 decimal places.
Will you give like half points if some of the numbers are placed correct?
No.
If one number wrong, the whole equation wrong.
Don't get the number wrong.
If you get this demerit.
All right, since obviously y'all have no questions, I'll try and send it the homework first thing in the morning, but certainly before noon. Give you something to play with over the weekend. And then we will see about the homework come next week. All right, folks, if you haven't gotten your notebooks as yet from the school, I urge you to do so. I certainly can send the slides. Yeah. But by the time you get through the whole semester, there's going to be, 300 or so slides. Yeah. But I'm willing to, if you are. So when I send the homework tomorrow, I will send the slides for last week and today. Okay? All right, folks, in that case, thank you all very much. You enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you guys on, wait, when is the holiday? That's Monday, right? So I'll see you guys on Tuesday. We don't miss anything.
All right, bye, guys.
All right, folks, have a good evening.
Good night. Okay.
Good night. Good night.